Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Hashira Half Hour. I am Hannah. I am freshly laid off, living the wild, unemployed life.
Ding.
That's all I got. Bryan?
Hey, what's up, y'all? It's me, B Rye. Uh, I'm just chilling with my best friend, Sailor Psyduck, constantly in the state of mind. I hope everybody else is not there. So that's what I got, folks.
Hey guys, it's Emily. Happy to be here for another week. I trying to make the best of the week. I feel like it's been kind of weird. We miss Hannah at our place of employment, but also it was like kind of other than that a good news week for me, so that's kind of cool. Also, it's like a rainy day today, so that just always puts me in a good mood. So, I'm here living my best Saturday morning life.
I love rain. Sometimes I think I should live in Seattle, honestly. Today we have a very special guest with us. Super excited to have you on the show. Jenna, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Jenna, and I'd like to claim the position of helping Rui through some therapy and giving him a giant hug. Um, I very recently finished reading and watching Demon Slayer, so I'm super happy to have been a part of this podcast or to be a part of it now. I am majoring in wildlife biology, so but in my free time, I love immersing myself in my favorite fandoms. And if you're interested in checking out my YouTube channel, it's called Master Fandom, and I post fun fandom edits over there. And I just love creating fandom music videos and having conversations with other fans about all of these lovely stories.
She is a really good editor. I'm just throwing that out there.
Thank you.
I've had to send her some pictures, be like, can you edit this for me? It's literally happened. But a little fun fact, Jenna and I met at Phoenix Comic Con. It was kind of a wild turn of events because we were at a Harry Potter trivia panel and she was cosplaying Zuko. I was cosplaying Katara, but we both shipped Katang. And we bonded over that, let's just be honest. And then I got her on the bandwagon of Demon Slayer and the rest is history. And here we are. I got her into it and now she is just like the biggest fangirl I know about Demon Slayer, and I love it. Absolutely. So, we're so excited to have you on the show today, Jenna. We are going to go ahead and dive right into the episode. Against core rules. In this episode, we get Rui's backstory. I can see her face like now she's like so excited to talk about this. This is why Jenna is here. Jenna is our resident Rui stan. She loves him. I'm pretty sure he's your favorite character of the entire show. So,
Yes, he's my favorite character, not only my favorite demon, but completely my favorite character.
I love that. That's so like different. You're the only person I know that's like that, and I love that. So, Jenna, would you like to talk to us about Rui? What was the thing about him that stood out to you the most to make you love him so much?
Yes. Okay. So I am definitely the Rui stan. There are lots of things about Rui that I absolutely adore, and most of that will naturally come out during our discussion about him and this spider arc. For instance, his backstory just completely blew me away. And since it was the first real backstory that had lots of like substance to it, I think that's why it was just such a game changer for me. But I'll get more into that later. But one of the things I love about Rui so much is how humanized he's made as a demon in this episode, and kind of how we get to see that play out through all of these episodes in this arc. When in the beginning, we just kind of saw him as this kind of psychotic abuser. And so I think it's just so unique to have a demon to come this far and just to have such this tragic and sad backstory. And I think his power is incredible for him to make the decision of giving away his blood to all of these kind of pretend family members, and seeing how those powers and abilities grew to be so insane for each of them. And I think that if Rui had kept all of that blood to himself, It's crazy to think that he would have had the brute strength and the molting ability of his father. He would have had the kind of puppeteer control thing that his mother had, the ability to shoot poison and make people into spiders and create cocoons, to liquefy prey like his brother and sister, on top of the power he already had and his blood demon art. And to add to this, I just think it's incredibly fascinating to think that Muzan allowed that splitting of power to happen, when we see him get so upset at other demons like Kyogai for not eating enough. And I just can't help but imagine that if Rui had all of these abilities that he gave away to his pretend family members, that he'd for sure be an upper ranked demon. But I think like the main takeaway for me is knowing how strong he could have been, but he didn't want to go down that path. And as a demon, I think that's saying a lot. And Rui never really cared about like the numbers and this whole ranking systems, the ranking system that the demons seem to be obsessed with. He just wanted a family, which I think humanizes him a lot because, he didn't want any of that power. And everyone wants to feel a genuine bond from their family members and their friends. And, something that I picked up on while rewatching this episode, it made me realize when Rui, right after his head got cut off, he explains that the more powerful he became, the less he remembered about his real family. And this really made me wonder if Rui was not only building this fake family because he was obsessed with that, but I also wonder if he was trying to grow this family because in a way it was making himself weaker. And in turn, he was remembering more of his actual family. And the thought of that is just like so extremely heartbreaking. And it just makes it seem like it's just like the first time we're seeing this humanization in a demon. And we see that he just regrets everything and is just trying to cope in any way that he can, while he's being continually manipulated by Muzan. But so anyway, I love this sweet boy.
Dropping some truth bombs there, Jenna. My favorite thing is watching Brian's face just go, oh.
I mean, like, you dropped a lot of different things right there. Like, there was so much to unpack from all those statements, like, specifically the, like, making yourself weaker to remember your human past. I was like, damn.
That was something I totally just kind of put together in my recent rewatch of this. And it's just kind of like the puzzle pieces were just coming together and it just made everything so much more sad.
Definitely some like psychological things happening that we haven't really seen about a demon yet. So it definitely brought on some different feelings. I remember the first time I watched it crying over his backstory and I was like, why am I crying over a demon? What is happening? Like he just tried to kill Tandro, my boy. Like it's definitely wild. So all good things. So kind of to go over a little bit of, what happened in the episode, we see Rui's dark, like extremely sad past. We're starting to see this trend. These demons, they're not necessarily all just evil. They're messed up people who chose to walk down the wrong path because of what happened to them, right? It broke my heart to see Rui was just like a sick child that couldn't do anything. He was not allowed to go outside. So kind of diving a little bit more into it, just like thoughts on that sad background, why it's important to the story, and where do we kind of go from here? I'll let Bryan go first.
I think his backstory is really interesting, right? Because from what we've seen so far, like tragic backstories have all been somewhat socially constructed, right? Like from a lack of friends, from like a loss of family. But his really didn't start that way, at least, right? He just had like a physically sick body. And I feel like that's kind of where things started on the wrong path for him, because you see him walking in the snow and then falling and just like on the ground, laying in this cold environment. And I think that's somewhat of a parallel to what he's feeling in real life, right? Like, even though he's watching these physical things happen and experience them, he's not connecting with them and he still feels isolated. It's not that kids are bullying him. He wants to go out and play and throw snowballs, but he just physically can't. And I think that's kind of where his path starts. And I think that's where his backstory becomes tragic, is because he's got all of these isolated mechanics and wants to try and fit into the world around him, but just can't physically reach it, which is really kind of sad. It's really sad to talk about, actually. Damn it.
I completely agree with you. The backstory is just so heartbreaking, and the parallel from the beginning scene when he falls in the snow, like you mentioned, compared to the end when he falls as a demon, it just like completely shatters my heart every single time. Like it's very hard for me to watch. And just going back to like the beginning of his backstory, Muzan just like randomly decides to just walk into Rui's room. He calls him a pitiful thing and wants to save him, which just, it makes me so incredibly upset. And Rui, being this young, innocent child, probably had no idea what becoming a demon would entail. He just wanted a stronger body. And then to see him kill his parents from self-defense, and later finding out that his parents were just trying to, kill him and then themselves to save them all the guilt of being murderers, basically. And the whole last scene, when we see them all in hell, it's I just cry every single time. No matter if it's when I'm editing a video with Rui's backstory or rewatching it. And I just think it's so incredibly unfair that Muzan completely just wrecked all of these innocent lives. If he hadn't stepped in, Rui would have still had this kind of weaker physical body, but he still would have been with his real family, being loved for and cared for. And in the end, I am very glad that Rui is able to be with his parents. But it is in the place of hell. So he has his broken body again. And it's just so incredibly heartbreaking to think that if Muzan hadn't stepped in, Rui would have most likely gone to heaven and had a healed body, everything. So I'm clearly very conflicted about involving his backstory.
I completely agree with everything that Jenna and Bryan have said so far. I don't think it's a question of like if what Muzan's doing is ethical. I think we know that like no matter what it is, it's not. But this is a child that we're talking about. And so to offer this kind of like strength and resilience like that, like a child's not, like you said, they're not thinking about what the long-term implications of that are. He just wants to go play. That's like what it comes down to. He's watching other children play in the snow and he just wants to be able to go join them like any little kid would want to be able to do. So when offered an avenue to go do that, even if he's a little bit mature for his age, like it's a no-brainer that it's something that he would take. And maybe even though the dialogue that he has is mature, like throughout the course of this episode and the previous ones that we've been able to see him in, like it is more mature, his way of thinking, but I still think that it's the thoughts of a child. And so there's not really a sense of like permanence to the crimes that are being committed. It's just, it is really sad and tragic, and it's a child. And, we've talked about like choices, and he, like, did he choose the wrong path? I think it's a little bit up in the air here, because like how much can a child really consent to these terms that are being offered, especially when they're not explained forthright. So like, could he really agree to this? I don't know. He did make a choice, but it's the choice of a child.
Yeah, I mean, kind of going into my next question, because it really feels like Rui was never in a situation where he, you know, was bad. I feel like most demon backstories that we get, we've already gotten or we're going to get, in season 2, they were already doing like bad things. They were hated by people, and it was because humans were also mean to them. But like Rui was just trying to live his life, and Muzan just walks in and is like, yo, I can do something that's going to help you live longer. So going off of that, is Rui really a villain? Is he truly a villain?
So my thoughts on this, and I don't think this will be a surprise, but absolutely not. I do not think Rui is a villain, and I will defend and protect him for all time. One thing that has continued to stand out to me about this story and what makes it so unique from other like hero versus villain stories is that all the demons are really just a manipulated, abused bunch of people who have been taken advantage of by Muzan. And even though these demons are representing villainous characters of this story, they all have in some way been destroyed by the real demon, which is Muzan. Mm-hmm. And a couple episodes ago, I think Tanjiro actually said that Muzan is truly the demon, mm-hmm. And just manipulating all of these other tragic people. But of course, I do want to acknowledge that Rui did do some very terrible things to his pretend family members, especially the mother and the sister, which were very bad. I really don't want to overlook that, but what he did do to those people was horrifying. But kind of once you realize that Muzan was the person behind all of that, controlling him, it puts a different spin on kind of what a villainous character is. And throughout this spider arc, I think you guys actually mentioned this a couple episodes ago, but there's this idea of puppetry that keeps getting brought up, especially with the mother spider, which then led to Rui being this puppeteer of all of his family members. But now it kind of makes it appear as though Muzan is really the ultimate puppeteer of Rui and the rest of all of these demons that he's controlling. And if they mess up, there's drastic consequences for that. We saw Kyogai be eliminated from the ranking, and what happened to Susumaru with the Kibitsuji curse. And so ultimately, Muzan is manipulating broken people into thinking that turning into a demon is their ticket to freedom. But that's so wrong and messed up. And if I were a demon slayer, I would for sure be fighting him right now to save all of these demons. I'm so over Muzan.
You got to go through your training arc first, Jenna.
Yeah.
On this show, that's only like 3 minutes. So
yeah, true. You got to go through your training arc, and you got to go through a few level up arcs too.
You also have to go through the cockroaches fighting arc too.
Oh my gosh. Jenna touched on it beautifully, but I think that my answer is a little bit different to this question. Is Rui a villain? I would say it depends on who you ask. It's all about reference, right? And we obviously have a lot of reference because we're sitting here as the audience and like get to passively see this story. Nobody else knows this. This is like all an internal monologue. And so, you have Tanjiro who sees the best in people. But on the other hand, like Jenna touched on, there is the family that was not treated well. And there's all these demon slayers that died on this mountain. Like, if you ask them, I would say that they think that Rui's probably a villain. And I don't know that that's incorrect. I mean, people are being like literally squelched in these like nasty cocoons. So it's all about who you ask, like whether or not his reasoning in his own mind was justified. It's like, these are still things that happened. So I think that his circumstances are very unfortunate. I don't know that I personally think that he's really a villain. I do think that Muzan plays a big part in that puppet master scheme as well. But something that's interesting about that too is that it seems like this is one that he was kind of hands off with after the transition. And we talked about that a little bit. Like why isn't he checking in on this? He's letting him like play house basically, which seems kind of unheard of because he usually wouldn't want demons to band together because there's the risk that they would band together against him at that point. So like why isn't Muzan checking in on this? Maybe it's because he also sees him as a child and is like not really worried or doesn't perceive a realistic threat. But I think it's interesting that we see that like some of these other demons have been met with consequences, and it doesn't seem like, at least at this point in time, that there has been one for Rui. So Muzan's fault. Muzan is the original sin here. I don't know, but Rui is still like actively engaging in stuff. And so I think depending on who you ask, some people might say that he is probably a demon. And well, definitely a demon, a villain.
Yeah. I feel like I fall somewhere in the middle on this question. Really, like as the arc started, obviously, like he's the main demon that we see. So, like, of course, presumed villain. By the end of this arc, though, like at the end of this episode, I think he falls to anti-hero territory. And I think that's where I want to categorize him, because you almost want him to succeed. Like you almost want him to like make it out of the fight alive to a certain extent. Like looking back retrospectively, you're like, oh man, I wish he could have done better. Like maybe Tanjiro's heart would have broken through to him. Like maybe that's a long shot, but at the end of the story here, like you look at this and you're like, man, he went through a lot and he really was just trying to chase after something that in his backstory he originally had. Like he was really under the impression that he like wasn't loved and was trying to chase after love when he had it the entire time. And as he's dying, he realizes that. So I think he really just kind of shot himself in the foot in the sense of trying to build all of these things when he just needed to be a little bit more conscious or see the fact that his parents were trying his best. I know that they probably, struggled a lot with his, sickness and stuff like that, but still, I feel like it's a very sad story, which makes you almost want to root for him. So I feel like he's the new Taylor Swift.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think that I kind of fall somewhere in the middle as well. Like definitely was manipulated. Muzan is of course the real true antagonist of the story, the villain that we all want to like take up our swords and go fight, right? But we got to go through our training arc first, because if I tried to come anywhere near that man, I would die so fast that it would be funny. They're like, oh, who was that girl? Oh, she's dead. But he still made these decisions, and a lot of it is based fully off of this misconception that his parents didn't love him. And I think kind of going into the next question that I have for you all, this is again like a turning point for him, is when he realizes that his family, they were going to die with him, right? They weren't just this family that was like, we're just going to kill you because you're doing things. Like they're trying to atone for the sin of him murdering another human, and they're dying with him because they obviously were a part of making this choice to turn Rui into a demon when Muzan showed up. So definitely pretty wild. I think I kind of just agree with all of you for sure. But seeing him in the afterlife with his parents brought me to tears, like I said. And this is a very powerful aspect of the story. And I think it kind of flows well with Tanjiro's character. Hear me out. But seeing Rui like reach so desperately for him and Nezuko as they like laid on the ground, like passed out essentially, realizing that's all he wanted in life. That's in his moment. He's like, that's what I wanted. And he honestly had that. He just was manipulated into believing that he didn't. It was very powerful. We're seeing that he's more than just a villain. He made those bad choices. He deserves to go to hell. But again, setting up the story, much more of it's not good versus evil. I know I've touched on that. People try and say that it is, but it truly isn't. And it's a perfect exhibit of that, right? So looking back on season 1, we're coming to the end of season 1. How do you think we've progressed as a story? Is this Rui story like a turning point for you?
I think to a certain extent, yes, it is kind of a turning point, right? Because the first impression that we get of demons here is that they're all bad, right? They're all just murderous and, really like bloodlusting. And, that's kind of what we see initially out of Nezuko, too, when she first gets turned into a demon, is that she becomes this, monster, so to speak. And now, when we're at this point in Rui, right, we've had stories about Kyogai, we've had stories about Tamari Demon, we've had stories about like kind of all of them so far. And now is the point where I think we're finally starting to see like that gray area fully evolved. Like this is the point where I think we kind of look at like demonism and like somewhat of an atonement form of them of their own life, right? They're trying to kind of make up for everything that they lost in their human life by becoming a demon, trying to reach for goals that they couldn't find before. So I think this is really the point in which like the story elevates in kind of, thematically talking about how humans interact and behave in the real world. And I think that's what's really cool about kind of elevating towards season 2, is because we're going to start to see a lot more things that make you feel a lot more gray and morally questionable. So
Yeah, I love that. And since I watched Demon Slayer for the first time, I absolutely remember how much of a turning point this scene was for me. Not only this scene, but just Rui and the spider arc and everything that this arc had about it, including the end of the Hinokami episode and just everything. But and I try not to get emotional when I talk about this, but this entire arc and Rui is really what made Demon Slayer become a part of my own like fandom family that I hold very dear to my heart. And so Rui's story and that spider arc is just what really did it for me. And it's another reason why I'm just so absolutely obsessed with Rui. And I just adore him so much because he serves as this gateway for me feeling completely immersed and connected to this story. And of course, there's just so much to love about this arc and how much it brings forward about Nezuko and Tanjiro's main character storyline. The aspect of a genuine family bond that Rui sees and sees in these siblings. And that's what he craves for and literally crawls for until his very last moments. And this idea that Rui could have had that exact same bond with his real parents, again, if Muzan wouldn't have stepped in and literally ruined all of their innocent lives. And so, in my opinion, this arc and this episode, Rui just truly put a brilliant spin on the story in a really impactful way. And it makes you so much more like wholeheartedly caring about a demon once again.
Agreed. Once again, every demon that we've seen so far, I think, has brought us a little bit closer to this moment. And I'm excited for what that means in the future as well, because we're still in season 1 and we're still, I imagine, at the beginning of demons that are going to be fought. There are at least 12 moons that we need to be worried about here that Muzan has under his control. This is one of them. And this is like lower 6 as well. This is a heart-wrenching story. I do think they're going to get worse from here. But, like Hannah set up the question, it just goes to show that this is more than a good versus evil. It's just about choices and choices that were made differently. And sometimes under the influence of immense grief or immense longing. And if I was in a position like any of these characters have been so far, I can't honestly say what I might choose. If there was an option that would ease a little bit of my suffering, I feel like it's almost inherently human to try to pick that. People don't want to suffer. But it's interesting that in choosing the most human choice, you become a demon and you have to live with those consequences for eternity or until you're dissolved. So this is one of the most tragic ones that we've seen so far. So I do think that it's a turning point in the story, and it goes to show that the lines are going to be very blurred from here on out. I think of like, are the demon slayers right? Are the demons sometimes right? I think that it's a little bit of both, and we have to look to the core of this to find where the real evil is.
Man, what you said about like it's the human decision to become a demon. Claps to you for saying that. Like, honestly, that's so true. Like, if we put ourselves in the shoes of these people and what they're going through, and like in the situation of Rui, he's sick. He wants to just be a kid and play, but he can't because he's so weak. And this man comes and says, I can fix that. Like, what are you going to choose? You're probably going to choose to say yes, right?
Right. Like, I mean, personally, I would say of these characters, Tanjiro is probably the least realistic human, and we love him, but like people aren't like that. Like, and that's why he's so, I think that everyone knows that. And that's why they keep like saying like, oh, he's like, who is this? He's like this ethereal being that's almost like not human. He's like obviously the antithesis to what Muzan is, but real people aren't usually like that. You know what I mean? Like people would choose, I think, something selfishly, because that's just how people are. And he's obviously like a one of a kind gem that we have, but like I wouldn't fault people for picking the thing that's going to bring them more comfort. It's normal. So
yeah,
it's sad and unfortunate.
Absolutely. I think Rui's story is really just absolutely a turning point for the story. Kind of similar to Jenna. Like, this arc is what really got me in the show as well. Just seeing, we've seen like some backstory. We saw, kind of a backstory for Kyogai. We saw little moments here and there. We can see that these demons are coming from messed up pasts. But this is the first time we're really seeing like a story unfold in front of our eyes about a demon. And it's really when the story starts to take a turn, in my opinion. So Rui, thank you for doing what you've done to the story. But before we move on, Jenna has a question for us.
Yes. So again, so I'm going into wildlife biology, so I constantly am thinking about animals and wildlife. So I think this is how this question kind of got sparked. But my question is, we see that demons' special abilities are usually connected in some way to their human life. For example, Kyogai implementing his Suzumi drums into his ability when we know that was a hobby of his as a human. Or Susumaru with her Tamari ability after inferring that she was probably someone who enjoyed that kind of sport. We continue to see this pattern with other demons throughout the series moving forward. So with this being said, why do you think Rui turned into a spider demon?
I love this question. This is so much fun. And I don't know how literal I'm going to get. I'm the theater major, and like the storyteller background is like what I have. So I think it's about symbolism, all of these. But in particular, the spider is symbolic of a couple of things. Obviously, it's a hunter. And I think that we've seen that. But to me, what I think the spider symbolizes the most is patience. Because they're not necessarily an active hunter. They weave these webs together to kind of ensnare their prey, but they're going to sit there and wait for it to come to them. They're not going to go out and actively, go hunt these things. So obviously there's like the literal iteration of this here. There's like the literal webs and the literal strings that are like ensnaring all these demon slayers on the mountain. So you've got the patience there. But if we look at like the metaphorical meaning here, it's like the bonds. It's like he's stringing all these things up and hoping that something will come to him. And so we see like throughout this hunt of these last several episodes that he's not super actively involved in the actual hunt of anything that is coming until Tanjiro and Nezuko make their way up the mountain, is when he becomes a little bit engaged. And even then, I think he waits until the last minute when he realizes that things are getting serious, to actually like engage in this fight. So I think it's perfect. And it calls out to the backstory that we just discussed as well. It's like he's putting out these feelers, these strands, these bonds, and he's waiting for somebody to come to him. He could have had it the whole time. He could have had it with his parents, but now he's putting these patient traps out there and waiting for what he wants to come to him. So I think the spider is very fitting.
Yeah, I agree. I think the spider is very interesting in this moment, right? We see a couple different ways that kind of he like implements this spider meaning. Like looking at how humans view spiders, right? They're somewhat misunderstood, right? Like spiders actually serve a purpose in the wildlife. Like they actually eat on like dangerous insects that could be bad for humans, and like they actually serve like a really great purpose in like the chain of life. And I think that's kind of where Rui fits into this piece of the puzzle, is that he is also extremely misunderstood, right? Like he didn't have the context of his parents like wanting to do something better, and he himself was wanting a bond that he kind of already had in the sense, right? So there's just a lot of misunderstanding around his character, and like he probably wouldn't have been that scary had someone made the attempt to reach out. And again, like somewhat like spiders in the real world, right? Like spiders don't just bite out of nowhere. Spiders bite when they're provoked. And so, like, when you look at it from that aspect, right, you see that, like, he was only doing things really in a reactionary sense because he wanted to protect himself and his pretend family. So, at this point, right, we really are seeing kind of nature and life imitate art here. So, I think it's a really interesting kind of parallel to see how he really does implement, like, the actual physical spider and its kind of misconceptions.
Man, good stuff. Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like most of the character designs of the demons are very literal translations of what they did in their human past, but Rui's isn't really. It's more metaphorical, like Emily said. And I definitely agree. I think that the first thing that comes to mind when I think about like his design was he so desired those family ties. And, it was like he used webs to, to fight, and like webs keep everything together. Very like random, but like that's the first thing that thought came to mind. But I have a slight theory, and this is really out there, but I feel like I just need to throw it out into the universe. So Muzan is searching for the blue spider lily. We've already established that we feel like Rui is kind of like a favorite amongst like demons. In fact, we're pretty much sure he would be an upper moon if it weren't for the fact that he was sharing his power with all these people. But Muzan just kind of lets him do this thing. So I think he's kind of a favorite. And I think Muzan is the one who like designed his demon form. So I feel like he just, because he's searching for the blue spider lily, he made him into a spider demon. I don't know. That's just me theorizing randomly, but more of the metaphorical stuff.
Yeah, I think actually what all of you said is super interesting, and something I guess I had never really thought about any of that. I kind of took more of like the scientific route, I guess, which makes sense because that's what I'm going into. But and I guess because I do love spiders, they're just incredibly intelligent and strong and have adapted for so long on this earth. But so here's kind of my theory on this. But like we talked about earlier, we know that Rui was born very physically weak. And I think the main reason why he turned into a spider is because of their spider webs. Spider webs are like an integral part of spiders' lives, and they are one of the strongest materials on the planet. And it's even stronger than steel. And from my knowledge, I'm pretty sure scientists are still trying to find a way to replicate a material that has the strength of a spider web. And so I think Rui literally went from being the weakest to the strongest. And even what we mentioned previously, or what he mentioned previously, was that his skin is even more durable than his webs, which I kind of thought was implying that like even his entire body is stronger than the strongest material in the world. And I think that the author of this story really did his research on spiders. We saw this throughout the different abilities they had. We saw this with the father spider, and how he molted, and how that's actually what spiders do in real life when they grow and when they become stronger. So that's kind of like my main reasoning behind it, and it's just something I've been thinking about for a while. And then another really quick side note to this, for why I think he potentially turned into a spider, was because we saw him in these flashbacks constantly, standing alone in the snow, in a distance, watching the kids play. And I think that this is a really key moment for the audience to understand that he spent a lot of his time being alone and being secluded, being solitary from any other interaction that he could have had with other people if he had a stronger body. And so there's a couple famous or popular spiders out there called widows or recluses, which I kind of drew the connection to him being a spider. He's alone, he's reclused, he's like a widow. And so that's just my thoughts on it. But I think there are probably so many reasons for why he's a spider demon, and I just absolutely love speculating about that.
I love how you all like had these very deep meanings, and I'm like, blue spider lily, favorite of Muzan, spider.
I still love that though, Hannah.
It's so out there too. Like, yeah, I just felt like saying it. But amazing stuff. Rui, again, amazing character. We stand Rui in this house, and I am hosting, so we do need to talk about Tanjiro for a moment. Something very, very powerful. I want to call out his speech to Gyu because that really resonated with me. We've talked a lot about Rui and like his villainous origins and how he really was very manipulated. He still like chose to make these bad decisions. And Tanjiro says like, I will not hesitate to bring down my blade because I want to stop, all this grief from happening, but I will still show empathy. It's like he understands like everything that we've talked about from both sides. And I think that he's able to see this from a different side, mostly because Nezuko is a demon, right? And he is able to look at things differently from all the other demon slayers because he's had this very specific situation. But how powerful did you find this speech? And do you think it affected Gyu in this moment, considering Gyu didn't remember or recognize Tanjiro in the moment that he gave him this speech?
I mean, it's very powerful, and it ties back again, like we just said, to this concept of like choices, and that Tanjiro was kind of like this like semi-perfect being that exists like for the most part. He does have his moments, but Gyu and Shinobu don't. I don't think that they share the same qualities that Tanjiro has. For them, it has become like a passed down tradition. Hashira have to be tough. Most of them die in the battlefield. Very few retire. We talked about that before too. There's like very, very few that just get replaced because they get older. You have to be tough. You have to have a thick skin, and you have to be better than the demons, which is also like asking for a lot because demons have regenerative abilities that humans don't. So I don't think that it's like anything personal to them at all when they're fighting any of these demons. They don't care if it's in the form of a small child. Like, they don't care if it's like, it doesn't matter what appears in front of them. So why would their clothing matter too? Like who cares? It's garbage that's on the floor. But to Tanjiro, like you said, he has this altered perspective because he's lost his entire family to a demon, including Nezuko. Nezuko's not really the way that she was before, Muzan stumbled upon them. And his driving force is to ensure that she does have the chance to turn back into a human and that she still displays some of those human qualities. And so I think that he does see his sister in these other demons as well. And he's like, you've made bad choices that I can't agree with. Part of this deal is that Nezuko hasn't killed anybody. And that is a big difference between her and the other demons that we've encountered. So I don't think that he can forgive the demons for doing that, knowing what has happened to the rest of his family, but he can still relate to them because Nezuko has been transformed. So he knows that it begins there. This is not something that happens spontaneously. It's something that they're manipulated into. So I think it's extremely powerful because I don't think that the Hashira have really considered that in a very, very long time, if they ever have. I think that it's just another day's work to them. And I do think that if it affected Gyu, I think that this is what probably triggered that memory in the first place. Because he's just like working right now. He's working with his least favorite coworker, by the way. And he's like, man, this shift is gonna suck. He needs his bestie. But
he doesn't have one of those.
Just
like, who's his bestie?
I don't know. He, himself, and him. But
he works alone.
he is a lone soldier. I don't know. I don't know who he likes, actually. I don't think he likes a lot of stuff, but I think he tolerates a lot of things right now. I do think he's going to get a little bit warmer as we continue to go on. But there was something in him, even as cold as we've seen him to be so far, there was something in him at the beginning of this season that really kickstarted all of this, where he did show a moment of mercy, despite this being his job. And I don't think that it's ever happened other than that moment. I don't think it's happened since. I don't think it's going to happen again, but something about Tanjiro and Nezuko, and probably these qualities that Tanjiro has that everybody notices that are like ethereal and, like I said, almost not human. Like, I think that that's memorable for him, and it was enough to give him pause. And he hasn't encountered its like since. So I do think that this is an impactful speech for him to hear and for him to recognize Tanjiro after hearing this, because it's so uncommon and it's not something I think that he would be likely to forget. But Tanjiro's gone through a lot of training in, the time that's passed. So it makes sense that physically he might not recognize this young boy. But I think that the tone of the message is what will bring him back to it. So.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, right, we've kind of seen how Giyu's been treated so far. So, like, really, this speech, I think, is more so like a dink on his head. And he's like the light bulb's like half turning on. It's like almost there. He's like thinking about it. And then it like finally clicks and he's like, ah! But, right, like, that's kind of the thing there is I think that Tanjiro in this moment is really standing up and I've said this multiple times. I'm going to say it again. This is my soapbox to die on, right? Tanjiro is the force of change in this show. Like, he is the delta that we are looking at every time, like, making other people impacted and changing, like, trajectories for other people. I think it's really interesting because now, right, we have this almost like hush moment in the very beginning, which I didn't really think about until you were just talking about it right now. Like you said, it's probably not going to happen again, in which Giyu shows mercy, but like he probably didn't tell anyone about that. Like, he probably didn't say like, hey, I just got back from the mission. Yeah, whole family died, but I let a demon go, by the way. The little kid said he handled it, so we're good. And now thinking about it, right? Like, first off, how do you not remember that? Like, how do you remember something that almost got you fired? And then he like is like, oh. So I just think it's a really interesting moment for Giyu, because he then realizes, or at least comes full circle with the changes that Tanjiro has made in himself, and the Tanjiro's changes that he's made to other people and, kind of the world around him. I think it's just a really interesting moment for Tanjiro to really stand up. Just like when he stood up for kind of Kyogai's respect and not falling on his papers, right? It's just a really awesome moment to see his heart come fully through.
For sure. I love that connection too that you made with Giyu, and it makes so much sense. It's perfect. But I think the writing in that scene in particular is really interestingly placed, because it happens right after you're feeling so much emotion from seeing a demon's backstory. And I know, like, for me personally, when I get to that speech, I'm always still sobbing over seeing Rui reunite with his parents. And so that speech naturally feels so much more powerful to me in those moments. And I just every single thing that Tanjiro said in that speech is exactly the way that I feel about these demons and why I have such a soft spot for them. And again, I think this really reflects well on Demon Slayer's, the story's ability to not fall into the the stereotypical category of like heroes versus villains or good versus bad. I remember so clearly the second I finished this episode for the first time, I texted Hannah and I said, is it bad that I'm obsessed with Rui because he's a demon? And that alone proves how well this story is constructed, that my mind would think that way. And to answer the second part of your question about Giyu, I think it probably didn't really affect him in that moment until he remembered. And I think that impacted him so much to take action. And so it was kind of like he had to remember things from the past and to remember Nezuko and what Tanjiro is doing for his sister to help him snap into action so fast, to protect Nezuko from Shinobu.
Again, perfect segue into my next question, because I definitely got a little emotional when he like remembered her and then instantly went on the defensive for them. Like he was a different person all of a sudden. While Giyu is very reserved and emotionless, like we've talked about, you get the feeling that he maybe cares a bit more than what he lets on. But we also kind of see a switch between Giyu and Shinobu in this moment. So Shinobu, this whole arc, has been talking about being friends with demons, right? And Giyu just continually like writes it off, just says, these are demons. They kill people. Let's go. Like he does not care. But all of a sudden, our roles are switched here. Giyu is protecting a demon while Shinobu is attempting to kill the demon. How do we feel this progresses these characters?
So I think yet again, it's just another example of how compelling these demons are and how much empathy we can show for them once we know more about their past. And in that moment when Giyu is stepping on Rui's clothes after he's died, we see this complete full 180 in the way that he decides to treat a demon. And he's actively making that decision so fast to protect Nezuko. And Giyu, right after Giyu tells Tanjiro that, you know, you shouldn't care about these monsters, and he's stepping on Rui's clothes, but in a second, he just snaps into action and protects a demon. And I think that just shows insane character growth for Giyu in a matter of seconds, and that he genuinely cared about this sibling bond, even though one of them is a demon. And he cared enough to even fight off one of his own comrades. And on the flip side of that, I do wonder about Shinobu because, you know, we see her wanting to be friends with demons. We kind of saw that with the sister spider before she eventually killed her. But at the same time, once Tanjiro kind of explained to her, like, Nezuko is my sister, like, I don't want you to kill her, Shinobu did have some empathy in that she was going to kill her with a poison, make her pass on peacefully. So I think there's definitely some interesting things going on there with these characters and their growth for sure.
100%. There's a saying about people that's like, sometimes people are they're kind but they're not nice, and then there's like people who are nice but they're not kind of thing. And I think that that's demonstrated pretty well with these two. Giyu is obviously, like, at first glance, more rough around the edges, I think, and somebody that maybe would be a little bit harder to like have a dialogue with of the two. But there's something that's more genuine, I think, about his reaction here and about everything that he said the entire time, because he has experienced immense growth in this moment, just like Jenna said. But when it comes down to it, I think that, like, if some other random demon were to just show up, I don't think that he would hesitate to just like take them down in a moment. It's something that's special about Tanjiro and Nezuko specifically. I think, again, this is like the moment where he's recognizing them, and this is like two people that he's taken a gamble on a little bit, but he's trusting in his instinct enough so that, like, back then he sent them to his trainer to try to make something happen. He said in his letter, like, I think that there's something special about these two. And I think that he did that with the risk of, like Bryan said, like, effectively getting fired. I don't even really know how that works for Hashira, but I imagine that the penalty is pretty steep. He's risked a lot to protect these two, and so I don't think that that's stopping now. In the moment that he does recognize them, he's willing to fight for the decision that he's made. And at this point, whether it's because he has like a genuine care for them or it's his pride in his own decision, I don't know if that's entirely clear. And I think it's going to continue to develop throughout the course of the show. But he's making the choice either way right now. It doesn't really matter why he's doing it. He's making an active choice to protect them. And Shinobu, on the flip side, has, like you said, been talking about wanting to be friends with demons. I think that this is like a classic example of kind but not nice, like we said. She's not going to let anything get in the way of her job. She's a woman. I think she uses some of her womanly features to her benefit in this role, and that is unique because there's not as many women in the Hashira. Like we said, it takes an amount of like brute strength, and women can be really strong, don't get me wrong, but sometimes they're not always set up with an environment that has allowed them to become that. And so she uses other features that she has, I think, to her advantage to allow her to fight at a Hashira level. So we've talked about poison being, again, like a woman's weapon that you also have to be smart enough to know how to use correctly. So she's really good at that. But I think that she's used her gentle demeanor to her benefit as well. She doesn't mean it. I don't think that she's ever meant it. She's not really interested in demons being friends with humans. She wants to kill all of them. There's a reason that she's in the Hashira as a woman. She's made it there for a reason. And I think that it's because she wants a chance to take down as many of them as she possibly can. And she sees no difference between any of them so far. So I think it'll take a lot to change her mind in that regard. But yeah, I think it just shows her genuine nature a little bit more clearly.
Yeah, this back and forth between them. First off, like, let's talk about how literally Shinobu's floating like a butterfly as they're fighting. Like, first off, she just like jumps in the air and she's like, "Ha ha! You think you can catch up with me?" Like, she just up in the air, like doing her acrobatic stuff. Like, that's great. Also, right, like Gyu turning around. Also, Jenna, thank you for not saying he went 360 degrees and saying 180. Because, like, if you go 360, like, just for anybody listening, if you go 360, you're in the same direction. You have to go 180 because then you're now facing the opposite direction. I hope this has been a informative PSA. Nonetheless, right? Like, you see Gyu all of a sudden switch gears, and I think that's really important, right? Because, like, finally our, like, aloof character wakes up and is like, oh, yeah, right, I helped those guys earlier. So, like, now he's awake and, like, figuring out what's going on. And then, like, they're having this, like, kind of philosophical debate, right? Like, hey, like, our job is to slay demons. Like, our job is to avenge those who have suffered. And he is not even explaining himself. Like, Shinobu keeps asking for, like, I need a reason to not fight you right now. Like, can you at least give me that? And he's just standing there silently. And I think it's really interesting because Shinobu's trying. Like, she's, again, not the favorite, but she's like, listen, I don't want to have to do the paperwork of, like, why I have to, like, kill you right now. And so, like, floating like a butterfly, sting like a scorpion, and she, like, throws her leg back with that blade. Honestly, that was terrifying, but also, like, again, so strategic, so clever. And I think it demonstrates kind of their characterization as to what we're going to see from them in the future, but also demonstrates how they'll go and the directions they'll take to protect the values that they hold and why they became Hashira. I think that's really what's most important about this scene, is that you not only see, right, like, the furthering of the values of the core and the demon slayers, but you also see the infighting of what it takes to be a Hashira and how they interact with each other.
I'm glad you brought up the little knife in her foot, because literally, like, Shinobu was ready to kill Gyu. She was like,
Yeah.
all right, I'm just going to stab you in the face. Like,
Well, like, that's the thing. Gyu had his hands tied up around her. Like, when that crow called out, like, had they not called at that second, like, he would have been dead. Like, there's no way he would have survived. I'm sorry.
and she was so casual about it. She's like, okay, like, if you're going to hold me like this, I guess I'll just kill you. Like, wild. Yeah, their working relationship sure is interesting. Um, quite the chase. I feel like we need to give this character some credit because she does not get enough credit in the entire story. But we finally get to actually meet Kanao, who is like, I call her Shinobu Mini because a lot of people, when they first watch it, think that Kanao is also Shinobu because of their purple eyes. They are two different people. She's a fellow final selection survivor. We saw her when, Tanjiro went, but she was just kind of standing there being very emotionless, not saying a word. But we learn that she is quite skilled because she's able to knock out Tanjiro, who has a thick and hard head, with her foot. What did you think of this introduction to this character?
I think Kanao falls into the very same category as Shinobu, right? Like, they have the purple eyes. They dress alike. They both have like the butterfly hairpin. Like, they're clearly cut from the same cloth as to like the way that they'll demonstrate their values in the ways that they fight. But also like kicking Tanjiro in the head and knocking him out on sight. Like, honestly, kind of thought it was somewhat cute because she was like, ha ha ha, you lay it on the ground. Let me knock you out. I thought, honestly, Kanao coming in like this was really interesting, right? Because she was like, I wonder why this guy is like protecting a demon, right? Or I don't know what question she asked, but she was like, well, no time to ponder, and then just kind of kept going for it. And I think that's very similar to how Shinobu acts, is like, I don't have time to think right now. I have to do my job. So I think Kanao really in this moment is, starting to strut some of those like, future Hashira goals, if you will, trying to demonstrate that she is someone who can really execute this position well and demonstrate her ability to cope with the situation at hand, right? This is obviously something that's probably not happened before, right? Where you have this demon slayer lying on the ground trying to say like, hey, respect your demons, man. They were people at once too. And then like holding on to a demon and being like, run. I think it was a great time. And also when she asked like, are you Nezuko? And Nezuko's just like, ape. Like, she was just so cute.
I'm not the only one. My heart melted.
Yeah, I totally agree that was such an adorable scene with Nezuko and her. But yeah, I think this introduction was also great, and it's interesting that you point out that Kanao did knock out Tanjiro. That's not really something I ever thought about, honestly, until you brought it up. But I think this really does prove that she is strong and capable. And I remember appreciating how just calm and collected she was, super quiet. She wasn't all like arrogant and loud like that other random Slayer was that we saw Rui like slashed to pieces a couple episodes ago. So I'm definitely curious to learn more about her character.
Absolutely. It's much more subtle. It's not like, dare I say, as flashy as we'll get to that. But it's not as bold of an entrance as even Shinobu, because Shinobu has like this butterfly descend from the heavens kind of entrance that we have. And even Giyu, like his was a little bit more, like I said, rough around the edges, but like his first entrance was also like kind of a big deal in that first episode. It's like, who's this guy? This is like very understated, this entrance that Kanao has. And it does make us wonder because she's dressed very similarly to Shinobu. So I think it makes us wonder in this moment, what is her significance in the story? Like is she another Hashira? Is she like an assistant? Are Hashira allowed to have assistants? But like they're dressed the same, so like what's going on here? Similar skill sets, similar tools that are being used. So I think that it poses more questions than it does answers in this moment, which I always like. I like to be left wondering.
Me too. And they do a really good job at just like introducing characters, but very like minimally. So you're like, who is that? Oh, guess I'll find out later. But yeah, her entrance literally was just her falling from the sky, knocking Tanjiro out. So pretty, like, it can be wild, but also very minimal. So, which works for the character. We kind of get the idea that she just doesn't really speak much and like Bryan said, she was chasing after Nezuko. Nezuko wasn't fighting back, and she's like, that's weird. Why isn't this demon trying to fight back? No time to ponder. My job is to kill demon slayers, whatever she said. So definitely an interesting character that I can't wait to dive into more as we get more into the story. But a lot went down this episode. It closed out with a flash. We saw quite a few new characters. The Hashira. It's the moment we've been waiting for. The name of our show. We've seen little bits and pieces of Hashira, and now we're going to meet them all. We are going to talk about them more in the next episode because we literally just saw them for like 3 seconds. But any final thoughts on this introduction and the episode as a whole before we move on?
That's my boy, my son. My boy. That's all I got to say. We'll get to it. I can go on about it later, but I'm very, very excited.
This one, I think, right, like we talked about, like just literally a couple seconds ago, right? This poses more questions than it answers. First off, kind of the first thing that I saw when I saw all these Hashira is the first thing I noticed was the guy on the right hand side with some 2 swords behind his back. I am very much so like detailed when I look at characters like that. Like I always look at weapons because I feel like it always talks a lot about how they'll perform in a fight, and I definitely saw that immediately first. And then you see, I think what's nice about kind of where they left this is that they gave you a good range of Hashira. Like it wasn't all like just a couple like same size people. Like, no, you had like little short baby with the black and blue hair in the front. You got the guy on the right hand side who's got like all these markings and bands all over his face. You got the guy in the center who I'm not using their names yet because like spoilers if you're watching this first time around. And then you got the guy in the center who's just like, ha. And it's really just a very interesting array, and it shows you that like anyone can be a Hashira. It's just like Remy, right? Anyone can cook. Like, should you? Questionable.
I was not expecting to talk about Ratatouille today.
That took a turn.
I love that you brought up the diversity of them because definitely when I watched this for the first time, I remember, and this is kind of random, but I remember thinking like, oh my gosh, look at all of this color. There's so much color, and I love that. And the tall versus the short and all of that diversity there. And it made me super curious to want to learn more about each of their abilities and powers. And it's just such an iconic scene to end off on as a cliffhanger. It's just awesome.
Yeah, you definitely get the idea that, like, obviously they say that these are the Hashira, so we know they're important, but just their character designs are so wild and out there. You're like, okay, way more important than the random slayer that didn't even have a Haori, was just like in the uniform. Like, definitely way more important. So very excited to dive more into these Hashiras. Great episode as always. We are running out of time, so we're going to go ahead and transition into our favorite moment from the episode, and I will go first. I feel like this episode had a lot of emotional hold, just like many of them have. And it did, as Demon Slayer does so well, is throwing in those comedic moments to make you laugh, even in the midst of like a pretty sad scene. I loved Giyu and Shinobu's little chase. We kind of talked about her just being willing to kill the man, which was wild. They have been semi working together, and the constant jabs have been hilarious. But my favorite moment was when she was like, "This is why people don't like you." And he's literally like, protecting Nezuko at this time. You think he's about to say something like, "I'm protecting her." And he goes, "I am well loved by people." And even Tanjiro was like, what is going on? He's so confused as to the conversation that he chose to go with. And Shinobu was just like, what the heck, man? Like, I'm asking you why you're protecting this demon, and you're choosing to tell me, no, I'm loved by people. Hilarious. Just keeps on moving forward with their little back and forth that I love so much. I love Giyu. I'll be your friend. I will be your friend. Don't worry.
That is so sweet. I love that's such an amazing moment too, and even like with the funny like sound effects too with their facial expressions. I love it. So for my favorite moment, I feel like this is probably obvious since I've talked about it to death by now. But it is the moment when Rui reunites with his family, and when Rui's eyes just pop open, his tear-filled eyes, when his father says that's not true, in response to Rui thinking he won't ever see his parents again. And just his face and the way he's looking at his mother and father, almost in this kind of mystical way, like, is this real? Like, do I even remember what these people look like? Like, is this fake? And his mother responding and saying, like, you know, no matter where you go, we're going to be with you. And it's so incredibly emotional, and it just tears streaming down my face every time I talk about it. I love this sweet little boy so much, and I just want the best for him. I want to give him a hug. I love Rui so much.
Both very good moments. This whole episode is so great. I feel like it would be hard to pick any one moment, but the moment with his parents is really powerful. I think that's like the most tear-jerking moment for me. So on a serious note, that's probably my favorite. There's just like there's something about him finding that connectedness again, even if it's only for a brief moment, and like the love of a parent being willing to like go into hell with your child. If that's what's going to save them, then so be it. Like, there's something very beautiful about that. So I think on a serious note, that's my favorite. On a less serious note, we're seeing Rengoku for the first time, and he is my boy. So that's that was like coming. Just a little glimmer of some sunshine for me at the end. Listen, we don't get a lot of time with him, so I am going to take every moment that I can.
As you should. He deserves it.
He does. For me, honestly, a lot less emotional, but a lot more context, right? Because I always like to also think about like, okay, like how realistic is this fight, right? Like, obviously, Demon Slayer is not realistic in a lot of senses, but the one thing that we did get out of this episode is we get to see the background of like what happens after a fight, right? Like, you see the Kikuchi out working, like, oh wow, like Lady Shinobu, she made this antidote so quickly, just like looked at it and was like, here you go. Right. And then they're like wrapping people up. They're like, man, we got to get going. Like, we got to get these people home. I want to get out of here. Like, and I think that's a really cool scene to see because like it gives them like a little bit more sustenance as to what the core is overall. Right. Like, it's not just these fighters. It takes, you know, many different parts, just like, you know, a play production would be. Right. You have your actors, you have your lights, you have your sound, you have your stage crew. Right. There's so many different working parts to the Demon Slayer core. And I think it kind of demonstrates how much the Demon Slayers have really committed into this field and really fighting for humanity, right? This isn't just like a solo effort of some people ragtag grouped along. Like, this is a very serious and organized effort. And this is really a small militia, if you will. So I think it's really cool to see like the entire context of where the Demon Slayers actually fight in. And then we kind of get to know, right, like that there's not just like okay, bye, like we destroyed a forest, like love to see it, bye.
Definitely, it's nice to see the aftermath of a fight. I feel like a lot of fight stories don't really have that. So good call out. Well, we are out of time. So thank you everyone for joining us. And again, a huge thank you for Jenna for joining us today, bringing in a lot of insight about Rui that I never even thought about. So I'm really happy with the conversation and what happened and and little baby. Oh, sweet baby.
Thank you so much for having me. I just appreciate it so much. And I love talking about fandoms and obviously Rui. So thank you so much.
Of course. Glad to have you on. Remember to follow Jenna on her social media. She is at Jenna Master Fandom on Instagram. Well, jenna.master.fandom. She does a lot of cosplay. I appear on her Instagram sometimes as well, so because we hang out a lot. And then, like I said, she has amazing edits on YouTube for Master Fandom. And also don't forget to follow Hashira Half Hour on all of our socials as well. If you leave a comment on our videos, you might see us answer it in a future episode. But thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you all next week. Umai.
My.
Umai.
Umai.